Welcome, everyone. I'm Leigh Morris, a longtime political observer and participant, and I'll be your moderator for today's town hall meeting on redistricting. On behalf of the League of Women Voters of LaPorte County, I welcome you. We wish we could have done this meeting in person, but the health and safety of each of you is more important than that. But we'll do our best to make this meeting as up close and personal as we can. We have 4 goals for today's town hall. They're pretty simple and straightforward. Number 1, we want to help you know and understand the importance of assuring that redistricting, a process that occurs every 10 years after the federal census is taken, this is so important, and we want you to understand why it's so important to each of us. We want to assure that you're aware of the importance of assuring that that redistricting is done fairly and equitably. And third, we want you to be aware of gerrymandering, a term we'll talk about a little bit more, but it's a process that undermines the fairness and equity of the redistricting process, particularly right here in Indiana. And finally, we hope to motivate you to take an active part in making sure that Indiana's 2021 redistricting process does not repeat the errors of the past. We are incredibly fortunate to have a terrific panel to help us fulfill those 4 goals and more. I'm honored to have the opportunity to introduce them to you. Dr. Elizabeth Banyan, who is professor of political science at Indiana University South Bend and director of the American Democracy Program, had so hoped to be with us this morning, but we just learned that she is ill and will be unable to be with us. So she'll be with us in spirit, I know. Our second panel member today is Representative Pat Boye. And Pat Boye is in her 2nd term as representing District 9 in the House of Representatives of the Indiana General Assembly. She's a member of the Environmental Affairs and Natural Resources Committees of the Indiana House and has served on the Elections and Apportionment and Family and Human Affairs Committees. Locally, she was a 4-term member of the Michigan City Council and has been a member of the Michigan City Plan Commission and the LaPorte County Comprehensive Plan Steering Committee. Representative Boye is a graduate of DePaul University in Chicago. She's a member of the NAACP of LaPorte County, a longtime member and past president of League of Women Voters, LaPorte County, and an active participant in the LaPorte County Better Government Study Group. Our 3rd panel member is Justin Keel. And in 2014, Justin Keel purchased the Regional News and the Westville Indicator, 2 longtime weekly newspapers in LaPorte County. As publisher, he's overseen the award-winning weekly publications and business operations of really 2/3 of the county's periodicals. At age 18, he was appointed to the La Crosse Town Council and became the youngest known public official in the history of the state of Indiana. Later, he was elected council president and has served in that position for over 5 years. At the regional level, Justin is currently vice chairman of the Northwest East Indiana Regional Planning Commission, otherwise known as NERPC, and a board member for the National Association of Regional Councils, an organization that advocates on behalf of councils of government all across this nation. He's an active member of the La Crosse Lions Club, a member of the Westville Chamber of Commerce, and Leadership LaPorte County. He's been a very active participant in the LaPorte County Better Government Study Group. In 2016, he was awarded One Region's Promise of the Future Award. And 2019, he was named Young Entrepreneur of the Year by the Northwestern Indiana Small Business Development Center. Our next panel member is Erin Nakowitz. Erin is a 28-year-old graduate student at Purdue University Northwest with a strong interest in government and current events. A lifelong resident of LaPorte County, he received his bachelor's degree in organizational leadership from Purdue University Northwest. His work life has included a membership of the cash management team at LaPorte Hospital, an operations supervisor for American Signature, and a caseworker and addiction recovery specialist with the Indiana Department of Corrections. He's currently preparing for a transition to education as a participant in the Transition to Teach program at Purdue University Northwest, preparing to become a high school social studies teacher. Our fifth member of the panel is Nathan Patrick. Nathan was a member of the first class of the Michigan City Youth Leadership Academy. In 2013, he was a junior counselor for the academy. In 2017 and 18, and he's been a member of the Michigan City Police Department Explorers Club Post 75 since 2016. He's been a volunteer bell ringer for the Salvation Army Red Kettle campaign since 2013, has tutored students at Michigan City High School and local elementary schools, volunteered on Fairhaven Baptist Bus Ministry since 2006, and has also volunteered since 2010 in Valparaiso Nursing Home Ministries linked to that church. He was the campaign manager for a candidate for the Indiana General Assembly, and then became arguably the youngest candidate ever to run for a seat on the Michigan City Common Council. Although he didn't win, his interest in government and politics is not abated, and he is currently a precinct committeeman. Nathan is now serving in the United States Air Force Reserve stationed at Grissom Reserve Air Force Base. And finally, and certainly not least at all, Dr. Ellen Szarleta. Ellen is the director of the Center for Urban and Regional Excellence at Indiana University Northwest, which engages the students, the university, and the community in the creation of positive, sustainable, and impactful programs and initiatives. She is also a professor in the School of Public and Environmental Affairs at IU Northwest. Ellen earned her bachelor's degree in political science at the State University of New York and her PhD in agricultural economics at the University of Wisconsin. She subsequently received her JD degree from the University of Iowa School of Law, after which she served as a magistrate for the Lake County Superior Court. Dr. Szarleta combines expertise in the fields of economics, public affairs, and law as she works with organizations in all sectors to advance innovative approaches to confronting complex issues while inspiring collaboration and transformative change. So we have a wonderful panel that's going to help us gain some great perspective on this issue of how can we have fairer and more equitable redistricting in our fair state of Indiana. Got a few ground rules for the meeting. Your microphones are all going to be muted so that we can listen together to the panel. If you have questions or comments that you'd like shared with the panel, send a chat message. There's a little box down at the bottom of your screen for chat. Send that question or comment to us as a chat message, and we'll do our best to respond to it. And if you have questions or comments to which you'd like the panel members to respond, send that question to us as a chat, and we will, to the extent time permits, try to cover all of your questions before the end of this meeting. And if you can, address your question to a specific member of the panel. So now, to lay the groundwork for our time together, let's watch and listen to the video Understanding Redistricting that was produced by Ballotpedia.
What exactly is redistricting? Let's go to the map. Redistricting is the process by which new congressional and state legislative district boundaries are drawn. Districts are political divisions from which United States representatives and state legislators are elected. District lines are redrawn every 10 years following completion of the United States Census. In most states, the legislatures are primarily responsible for redistricting. Reformers believe that lawmakers redraw state district lines with political interest in the outcome. Instead, reformers advocate using different redistricting processes, including independent apolitical commissions. Others maintain that alternative processes are less accountable to voters and are still subject to partisan abuse. Redistricting is often challenged due to gerrymandering, the practice of drawing district lines to favor one political party, individual, or constituency over another. Political parties sometimes draw district lines for their own benefit, instead of being proportional and creating fair representation. Additionally, district lines can potentially minimize the influence of minority voters by disproportionately consolidating them within single districts or splitting them across several districts. You can obtain more information on redistricting by visiting ballotpedia.org.
Okay, now we'll be posing a major question to each panel member, after which the panel will have some time for dialogue with each other before we turn to you to give the panel an opportunity to respond to the questions that you've placed in the chat box. So without further ado, let's begin with our questions to the panel. If Dr. Banyan had been able to be with us this morning, her question would be, can you please tell us about the history and impact of gerrymandering? And I'm sure she would have done it 100 times better than I. But gerrymandering is a way to try to cement political parties in office, in power, by tilting the political map steeply in their favor. So whatever party is in power, gerrymandering is the process of trying to arrange those legislative and congressional districts in such a way as to perpetuate that party in power. It's not new at all. It goes all the way back to the beginning of this country, and it's named for a person who originated, Elbert Gerry, who showed us how that can be done. And it's been done by Republican and Democrats alike all through the years. The goal is to draw boundaries of legislative and congressional districts so that as many seats as possible are likely to be won by that party's candidates. Drafters accomplish this mainly in two ways, commonly called packing and cracking. Now, cracking does a packed district is drawn to include as many of the opposing parties' voters as possible. You try to pack them into districts off by themselves so that they are not going to have as much impact as others. That helps the governing party then win surrounding districts where the opponent's strength has been tilted and diluted to create the packed district. So that's packing. The other concept is cracking. It does just the opposite. It splits up clusters of opposition voters among several districts so that they will be outnumbered in each district. An efficiently gerrymandered map has a maximum number of districts that each contain just enough governing party supporters to let the party's candidates win and hold the seat safely. Even during wave elections when the opposition does especially well, and it packs the opposition supporters into a minimum number of districts that the opposition will win overwhelmingly. This packing and cracking terms are used to describe specialized activities used by legislators to keep partisan majority in the district, at the same time holding the populations of the districts equal. Partisan legislators look at groups of voters where they live and they bring those neighborhoods together, and this is called packing. Legislators will split up neighborhoods to minimize the impact of the opposing party. That's cracking. Now, just a little bit about redistricting in Indiana. Indiana is one of 44 states that put the state legislature in charge of redistricting. And since legislators draw the district maps, politicians gerrymander districts to choose voters they already know will vote for them and exclude those who will vote against them. Communities of interest, including cities, counties, school districts, neighborhoods, are often divided by district lines. And we have examples of that all over the state of Indiana, including LaPorte County. And this can lead to a community's interests being ignored or underserved. When districts are lopsided from a partisan perspective, it creates polarization, with candidates appealing to the fringes instead of the middle. And compromise becomes a dirty word. And there's really no reward for consensus building. In 2014, 54 of the 125 candidates for the Indiana House and Senate had no opposition. And as a result, Indiana's voter turnout was the lowest in the country at 28%. In 2016, 35 of the 125 candidates for the Indiana House and Senate had no opponents. In 2018, 37 out of the 125 seats were unchallenged. And on the average, from 2010 to 2014, about 42% of Indiana's state legislative candidates ran unchallenged by the opposing party. When politicians don't have any competition at the ballot box, then Hoosiers are probably not going to be fairly represented. So I hope in some small way this contributes to your understanding of the redistricting process, how it's done, and how gerrymandering can undermine the fairness and equity of the outcome of that process. Now let's turn to Justin Kiel for our next question. Justin, why is this issue important to the people of LaPorte County?
So first and foremost, redistricting is a process that determines who your representative is going to be. And this is going to be at the national level, which a lot of people think about, but it's also at the state level. And even more importantly, for a lot of people, it's at the local level as well. Redistricting occurs at all these different levels after the census is complete. And how it's redistricted really determines a lot of different things. One good example is how much candidates might campaign in an area. If you have a highly competitive district, candidates are more likely to campaign aggressively because it could be a close race. Whereas if the district's been packed and it's an overwhelming slam dunk for one candidate, they might not really feel the need to spend a lot of money or time campaigning in different communities. It also determines whether your views are going to be a majority view or a minority view. If you get redistricted into in a different way, you might not be the majority opinion anymore. It might change who your representative is. It might change how well you feel like you're being represented. So those things are important. And in this cycle, particularly, there are a lot of new technologies and tools available to people who are drawing these maps that didn't exist before. So we have an opportunity here to see perhaps more how these maps are being drawn, but also there's tools that could be taken advantage of to make them more unfair too. And finally, when errors happen with these maps when they're being created, there's a thing that can happen. I've called it misenfranchisement. Or you have the right to vote, but if the maps are drawn incorrectly, which happens sometimes at the local level, you can end up getting to the ballot box and your representative that you should be able to vote for isn't actually on the ballot. And so making sure that we're paying really close attention to how these boundaries are drawn locally can make a difference for a lot of voters.
Now, looking at LaPorte County itself, Justin, how would improvement in this redistricting process be beneficial to our county?
So our county currently has some of these misenfranchisement errors that I talked about, and this is something that I've been researching for the last two years now, roughly. In fact, I started to find some of these when I myself was running for county council, and there are a handful of errors throughout the county that could definitely be fixed in the process of redrawing boundaries. There are some districts that maybe verge on gerrymandering the way that they're drawn. And so this is an opportunity to fix those and maybe make them more equitable.
Mm-hmm. The congressional districts that are impacted in LaPorte County area offer some opportunities for review as well. I would think, Justin, from the standpoint we're in two different congressional districts, does that give LaPorte County a strong enough voice in issues and opportunities for input and influence when we're divided in that way? Certainly LaPorte County being a part of the 1st Congressional District makes that a stronger Democrat district, and LaPorte County's southern portion being attached to the 3rd Congressional District, or 2nd Congressional District rather, perhaps makes it a safer Republican district. But do we lose in that process? Question mark.
Maybe we do benefit from having it split. You know, we have people in the county that have connections to both political parties. That can be a valuable thing. It's hard to say. I mean, you know, I'm in the 1st Congressional District. It runs just the sliver of the western portion of LaPorte County. And I mean, to be honest, I can't say that I've ever seen any of my congressmen come visit La Crosse. I mean, maybe it should be drawn differently so it's more compact, or I don't know. It's a good question.
At least the opportunity to review this kind of situation is an important process for us to consider, don't you think?
I think so.
Yeah. Okay. Let's turn next to Pat Boy. And Pat, can you fill us in a little bit on how the Indiana General Assembly has dealt with this issue of redistricting and gerrymandering?
In the past, they haven't dealt with it at all. Not in the recent past, but this year there are 2 bills in the Senate on redistricting standards. There was nothing in the House because they didn't hear anything in committee. There were bills, I think, but I didn't do one this year, but I've done one before and it gets nowhere. The Senate Bill 103 establishes redistricting standards for congressional and state legislative districts. It provides that the initial proposed plans for congressional and state legislative districts must comply with redistricting standards. It allows the General Assembly during the process by which the initial proposed plans become effective by being enacted as a law to consider and adopt modifications to the initial proposed plans that are publicly explained and documented. It provides that as much feasibly possible, no district may be created so as to unduly favor any person or political party. It provides that the General Assembly shall take all steps necessary to ensure that the procedures are in place to provide the public with redistricting data and computer software and drawing maps, and create a process for the public to submit maps to the General Assembly for consideration. That was by Senator Greg Taylor, who is a Democrat. It was referred to the Committee on Elections. Senator Kadora was added as a co-author. J.D. Ford was added as a co-author, and that's where it stood. It never got out of committee. It might not have even been heard in committee, but it was referred to it. The other one, hang on, I got to figure out where it went. Commission. Come on, computer. My internet is really slow this morning. I don't know why. The other one was by Senator Kadora, established a redistricting commission to create, hold hearings on, take public comment about, and recommend plans to redraw General Assembly districts and congressional districts. It provided for the appointment of 4 commission members by the legislative leadership. It's established the Redistricting Commission Nominating Committee to receive applications from and evaluate applicants to fill the 5 remaining positions on the commission. It provides for selection of those 5 commission members from pools of applicants selected by the committee, requires the Legislative Services Agency to provide staff and administrative services to the commission, establishes standards to govern the commission and the agency in the creation of redistricting plans. It provides that the General Assembly must meet and enact redistricting plans before October 1st of a redistricting year. It authorizes the General Assembly to convene in a session to act on redistricting bills at times other than the times the General Assembly is currently authorized to meet. It repeals the current law establishing a redistricting commission for congressional redistricting. That one was referred to committee. It didn't even get any co-sponsors, and it was never heard in committee, so it went nowhere either. Both of those sounded like they had pretty good ideas. But, you know, it doesn't mean that anybody's going to listen when you're a super minority. As it is right now, what our redistricting legislation says in our code, they shall be established by law at the first regular session of the General Assembly, convening immediately following the United States decennial census. If a session of the General Assembly adjourns without having complied with the requirements of Section 1 of this chapter, or if for any other reason, at any time, the state finds itself without a valid congressional district law, a redistricting commission shall be established, which will consist of the Speaker of the House, the President pro tem of the Senate, the Chairman of the Senate and House committees responsible for legislative apportionment, and a 5th member who shall be appointed by the governor from the membership of the General Assembly. Right now, every one of those people is a Republican, every single one of them. And I cannot imagine the governor appointing a Democrat to that committee. The Redistricting Commission shall meet within 30 days after adjournment of the General Assembly at a time and place designated by the President pro tem of the Senate, and shall adopt a congressional redistricting plan in accordance with this chapter. Any plan so adopted shall be signed by a majority of the redistricting committee and submitted to the governor, who forthwith shall issue and publish his executive order establishing congressional districts in accordance with the plan so adopted and directing the commission to place such congressional districts in effect for the primary and general elections next succeeding such General Assembly congressional districts so established shall continue in effect until changed by statute. That's what we do for federal districts. And we have a section on resolution of inconsistent conclusions in congressional districts, treatment of geographic slivers, which is places that are kind of like off the side of something, maintenance of census descriptions and maps, incorporation of census reports and documents. And then it's got a long list of where all the districts are. And then when it gets to Public Law 5, 1986 is intended to be a codification and restatement of law. No effect on rights or liabilities is accrued. No penalties are incurred, crimes committed or proceedings begun. Excuse me, I got to get a cat off of something. Get down, get down, get down. Thank you. We have a new kitten and he likes to knock things over. Anyway, there's really there's no change to it. There's no possibility of anybody having any effect on it because they are all Republicans in office right now. And I think that we do a disservice to our state by not having at least a nonpartisan redistricting commission. I think we're doing a great disservice to our communities by this, because there are not 71% Republican voters in this state. It's closer to 56 maybe, but we have 71% of the legislators in the House of Representatives right now that are Republicans. The Democrats can talk all they want, but nothing will get done. The reverse could happen if the Democrats were in power. It's not a this party is better than this party. It's a this party is in power and they're going to keep it. I know the Democrats have done the same thing in the past, and I think we need to change this, but nothing is getting done because no one wants to do it.
But Pat, you know, one of the great things the General Assembly did, and I think it was 2016, was to create a summer study group to look at this redistricting process in Indiana and to recommend a different nonpartisan approach to it. And they formulated a really great legislative proposal, which came back to the General Assembly and suffered the same fate as the legislation you've described in this session of the General Assembly. It was referred to committee, and the committee chairman refused to allow a hearing to be held, and so the legislation died. And that's been happening year after year after year. So we salute the General Assembly for having taken that step, crazy. But it's most unfortunate that nothing happened with it.
It is. It's kind of, it boggles the mind sometimes that people don't see what this does to their districts, because it favors the districts that have the power, and it favors the money goes to those districts. It doesn't go to the other districts that don't have the representation. It sure changes a lot of people in the state.
Yep. Right. Now, the process for the General Assembly this year is going to be particularly challenging because of the delay in the census results. As we understand it, those census results are not to be available before September 30th. So the General Assembly has to modify its approach. Is that right?
That's exactly right, because we're supposed to have it done by October 1st, and we can't do that in one day.
No.
There's no way.
Not. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. Of course, they have to use the census data to do it, so they can't do it before they get the data.
Right. So we'll be hopeful that there'll be a special session of the General Assembly, as we understand it, called in October.
Yes.
And I believe there is a legislative proposal coming to eliminate the requirement for a redistricting commission to act, that it will leave it with the General Assembly as such. Have you heard about that, Pat?
I haven't heard too much more about redistricting in the House.
Yeah, I understand that they're going to eliminate that current legislative provision for an independent redistricting commission if the plan is not completed on a timely basis, so that the power will remain with the General Assembly rather than an independent commission. Well, Pat,
Well, I was really glad to hear that they that there's the independent commission, and you have been appointed to that. Is that right?
That's right. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. Yes. And basically that.
Well, I'd like to congratulate you.
Oh, thank you. The independent commission really mirrors much of what was in the legislative proposals that did not get a hearing this time. And it is consistent. And, Dr. Szarleta is going to tell us a little bit more about what's going on in other states in a moment, but we're not unique with this process, and we're not unique with the need to make changes in it.
Oh, definitely.
So,
and we're not as heavily gerrymandered as other states, but we are in some ways. Yes.
Our independent commission is
Thank you so much.
Has held 7 public hearings thus far, and it's been amazing to hear from the people in each of the congressional districts just how negative the impact has been of gerrymandering on their particular home districts. We've gained a lot of insights into just how devastating this gerrymandering process has been. So thank you, Pat. Appreciate your leadership and appreciate your involvement with our representation in the General Assembly.
Thank you.
Now, Dr. Ellen Szarleta, could you tell us about how other states have been dealing with this process to make redistricting more fair and equitable?
Absolutely, and welcome to everyone who's joining us this morning. I thought I'd give a little bit of a background first so that we can put other states' actions in perspective, and we can think about what that's going to mean then for Indiana and better understand what's happening here in the state of Indiana. And so, as the video stated and Leigh referred, we have requirements that are put in place that some of which are from the U.S. Constitution, requiring that, in fact, that there be these new areas of representation, what we refer to as districts redrawn every 10 years. And state legislators and legislatures and commissions are the ones that are given the ability to move forward with doing this, and it varies by state. I think that's a really important thing to understand, is that different states have different processes in place, and even different criteria. Although they all have to follow the federal criteria for the congressional districts, there's actually quite a bit of variation between states in drawing districts at the state level. And so if we could probably spend a whole session talking about what the federal requirements are, but I thought that it would be really important for us to understand too that there are some very common practices across states as well. And so, as Leigh and others have referred to these requirements, we have the idea of compactness, we have the ideas of continuity. I think Justin referred to that. There's a concept referred to as intelligibility, meaning that we have to understand the district as it's drawn. It's not just about simply taking a computer program and saying, let's cut the state up into equal districts that are in fact contiguous and are compact, that we have to have this more subjective criteria to understand how these districts make sense to us as citizens, okay? And so many times state legislators will in fact put in place additional state requirements. And as I just said, many of those requirements are similar across states, but there are also some requirements that differ across states as well. So one action that can be taken is that the legislature actually establishes criteria to define what those districts actually look like. And then we have the legislative action, we have possible court action, and in some states, and I'm sure everybody's heard about the court cases that have been brought and gone all the way up to the Supreme Court, and including North Carolina, and Arizona, famous case. So court action can be taken in order to address these gerrymandering issues, and some states have moved along those lines. And then other examples are really thinking about ways to change the actual process. In some states, referendums are allowed, and these referendums have actually led to significant changes that have attempted to correct the gerrymandering that's taking place. So I thought I'd just give you a couple examples of that. In 2018, a majority of the voters in 5 states actually passed a referendum that threw out the old partisan system. Those states were Colorado, Michigan, Missouri, and Utah. Those 4 states in and of themselves decided to put in place a reform that moved the job of redistricting away from the legislatures and actually gave it to an independent transpartisan commission. And then in Ohio, there was a voter approved reform that mandated a bipartisan vote on redistricting that would prevent either major party from monopolizing the process. And so in this way, where states have had the ability to have referendums, they have moved most recently, 2018, to more independent commissions. And we don't have that referendum possibility here in the state of Indiana. So as Pat was talking, this reform is coming from, or should be coming from the legislature. So 15 states now have independent commissions or politically neutral bodies that draw the election districts. 6 states have 6 of those states with independent commissions are Alaska, Arizona, California, Idaho, Montana, and Washington. Hawaii and New Jersey have a balanced bipartisan commission with court-appointed nonpartisan chairs. Iowa has a nonpartisan legislative service agency, which takes care of this process. And then Florida actually relatively recently made it unconstitutional to draw election maps that actually favor one party. So there's a lot of possibilities, a lot of opportunities here through legislative action, and then also, depending on the state in which you reside, through referendum. And then of course, there's always the legal process that serves as a vehicle for change as well. That's wrapping it up very, very briefly here, so that we can think more about what opportunities exist for Indiana and what's happening at the national level.
Thank you so much, Dr. Szarleta. That's very, very helpful. And this will be a great opportunity for our participants to set forth some questions that they may like for you and other members of the panel to answer. So use that chat box at the bottom of your screen, participants, because we need your questions to make sure that our panel is in a position to respond to the issues and questions that are most important to you. So please do get those questions to us so that we'll have those a little bit later in this program. Now, let's go next to Erin Nakowitz, who's going to talk to us about the fact that the Republicans and Democrats really drive this process, but we have a lot of independent and other party members in the state of Indiana. And why is this important to politically independent folk? So, Erin?
Hi, thank you for the introduction, and thank you again to all of you for inviting me to speak on this panel. I very much appreciate the opportunity. I wanted to talk first about how independent voters are influenced by this process and how the Republicans and Democrats drive it. Well, to start off with, I thought it was interestingly that you mentioned at the beginning of the meeting that Indiana is one of the states with the lowest amount of voter turnout, right? I think the thing that we see the most with this is just an increase in voter apathy. And with the amount of hurdles that independent candidates already face in the local and state elections in regards to running against a Republican or Democrat, having to deal with then the voter apathy created by situations like this, where we see the gerrymandering come into effect, and to independent voters, when we hear that, well, you know, don't worry, the 70% Republican state electorate is going to look into the issue a little bit further. It's just like hearing, it's okay, we're letting the fox guard the hen house, right? So to independent voters, it just it becomes less of an emphasis on getting involved in the political process. Before we even get to the part where the independent voters can get involved, we have to deal with strict voter ID laws. Indiana shuts off voter registration 29 days before election day, the earliest date allowed under federal law. We have aggressive voter registration purges, and we've got cuts to early voting locations. So for independents, maybe who have not declared the political party, it then becomes an already large hurdle to be able to participate in the process to begin with. Of the independent candidates in the 2020 Indiana House elections, those candidates received roughly 4% of their race's respective vote. The problem for third parties is compounded by restrictive ballot access laws and other barriers that the major parties have erected to protect their de facto monopoly. Third parties face a number of disadvantages to start with, including federal campaign finance laws, state ballot access laws, lack of resources, lack of media coverage, regarded as too ideological, and finally, specifically when it comes to redistricting, information costs. When voters are redrawn into a new incumbent's congressional district, any familiarity with their representative is eliminated. Citizens who are not redrawn into new incumbents' districts do not incur that same increase in cost, since familiarity with their representative is not affected. For independents, you don't feel familiarity in any representative you may have. Because if you identify as a libertarian or a democratic socialist or a constitutionalist party member, knowing that your representative that you would vote for has virtually no chance at ever receiving the election win that you're looking for, it just kind of disenfranchises you and de-incentivizes you from participating in the process for moving forward. Finally, I wanted to say that as a solution to this type of issue, independent redistricting commissions sound like the saving grace for free and fair elections. The people who make up these commissions are not elected officials and are typically screened prior to their work by an independent entity to guarantee fair outcomes. In December of 2016, the Center for American Progress released a report in favor of independent redistricting commissions, stating, independent commissions offer several benefits, including eliminating the appearance of impropriety and making elections fairer. Legislators, for instance, are 4 times more likely than independent commissions to create congressional districts that deny voters choice in the primary, and 2 times more likely to do so for general elections. This is perhaps one of the reasons why maps drawn by independent commissions face fewer legal challenges than maps drawn by politicians. So that's kind of all I had to go over.
You know, Erin, you have pointed out a number of factors that contribute to low voter turnout in Indiana. As I said, in 2014, we were dead last in terms of voter turnout in the United States. The University of Chicago did a research project after that election to determine why that was the case. And they found Indiana to be one of the most gerrymandered states in the nation. But gerrymandering is only one factor. You've identified a number of other factors that contribute to low voter turnout. And it's really interesting when you look at states that have twice the turnout or thereabouts that we have in Indiana. Why is that? And it's because they have done a better job of fair and equitable redistricting. They make it more convenient for voters to vote. It is really not rocket science to see how we can make a positive difference. And gerrymandering, though, is one of the key issues that has to be dealt with. It undermines everything else in the elections process. So thank you so much, Erin. Appreciate that. Stand by. We're going to have some more questions for you, I'll bet. Okay. Now, we're going to turn next to Nathan Patrick. You know, most of the people that are dealing with this issue are Caucasian, and they're over the age of 50. So, Nathan, talk to us a little bit about why it's important. This issue is so important to a more diverse next generation.
Yes. So this issue is important to a more diverse generation because Indiana is made up of all sorts of people. You have black, you have white, you have young, you have older, you have people that are in nursing homes, you have people that that aren't felons that can still vote. You just have a whole pot of different people, and as we progress in the future here, more and more of those people are young people. And so it starts, for me, when I look at this situation, it starts at a very basic level of what are we teaching our young people in our school systems? How are we telling them, or what are we telling them about the governmental or government process in the different processes? Because I find as I go out, or as I go throughout this journey in my life, other young people, I'll ask them certain questions and they have no clue. They don't know the different branches of government. They don't know their local representatives. They don't know who their city council people are. They don't know who the mayor is. And I say that's a two-part problem right there. That's partly their fault, of course, because you should want to know who these things are. You should want to have some sort of an interest, because it's very important local politics. It starts at the local level. It starts when you walk outside, what directly affects you, from your local police, from your firefighters, from the trash man picking up your trash, from you paying your water bill, from the street department. It's all local. And so once we understand, or once we are able to relate how local it is and how important it is to the young people, then we'll have more people interested into saying, well, wow, something as important as, the redistricting really, really affects me. It affects my family, because, funding is based off of redistricting. How much, for people who are on Medicare or Medicaid, or that are qualified for free and reduced lunch, and what goes here, and different grants that come to an area, it matters. And so if we can have at a younger age, our representatives that are actually teaching, not just basically saying, here I'm in this position to make decisions that will directly affect your life, but me as a representative, I'm going to come into your communities. I'm going to hold these town halls, and yes, you can hold a town hall at a library, but what else are you doing outside of that? Are you inside of the school systems? Are you talking to the young people? Are you having them to understand, listen, this is who I am, and this is what I do, and this is how this directly affects you. And you can go off of, for instance, what we're going through, the redistricting. This is a major, major deal, because this will affect, what your parents do, or what you do, or how you can do them, based upon the different resources that can come to you from redistricting. So it for me, the question, or my answer to that question is how this is going to be affecting, or the people dealing with this situation are people, mostly over the age of 50. Well, these people over the age of 50, they have an obligation to the people under them to say, well, I'm not going to be here much longer. And from what I'm observing right now, I have an idea of where we need to go, but we can't get there without including young people, or without being more diverse. We won't be able to completely reach our goal.
Nathan, very well said. As I've gone past 80 and creeping up on 90, you're the generation I'm really thinking about, and it's the generation that you represent, and others younger, that I think all of us have an obligation to work to try to create the environment that makes this a better place for your generation and future generations to live and work and play. So you're very much the center of my involvement with this redistricting process. It's not going to make a much difference in my life, but it is in yours, and for all folks in between. So thank you, Nathan, for being a part of our panel today.
Yes, sir. Thank you for having me.
Now, we've got a little graphic that Dr. Banyan sent to us that maybe gives you a little bit better feel for what this gerrymandering process may look like. You have 3 different ways to divide 50 people into 5 districts. You have 60% blue, 40% red here. Here you've got 3 blue districts and 2 red districts, and blue wins. Here, it's a perfect representation. Here you've got a compact approach, but unfair, because you end up with 5 blue districts and 0 red districts, and blue wins. So they may be neither compact nor fair, and you can see how they're drawn. And this is not an unusual way to see a redistricting map drawn, by the way. You end up with 2 blue districts and 3 red districts, even though that's very different from the population that you're serving, and red wins. And it's all a matter of how you get to draw those lines. So compactness is important. Contiguousness, how the districts are connected to each other, how you deal with competitiveness, how you create an environment in which there is true competition within that district. And then how do you deal with communities of interest? It's important that that our rural areas, for example, are not obliterated from the political process by concentration on urbanized areas. You have school districts that are important. We were talking with a person in another congressional district where their school district actually ends up being in 4 different legislative districts. And not one of the legislative representatives has ever been responsive to the school system, because it was so remote from the center of their influence. So gerrymandering is not just a theoretical thing, it's a real world thing. I want to turn now to the panel and kind of open it up to our panel members for dialogue among yourselves. You've heard different perspectives about redistricting and this gerrymandering process. And now the microphone is open to each of you for dialogue among yourselves as to how we've unfolded this information about redistricting and what more we might need to say about it. Go ahead, panel members. The floor is yours.
I have a question that can get them started that's been asked here, asked of Erin, but and others like for you to chime in. How do the voter registration issues that you mentioned, Erin, how do they make it more difficult for an independent candidate than for, say, a Republican or a Democratic candidate?
I think that's a really good question. The issues that I brought up and how they impact an independent candidate in comparison to a Republican or Democrat are simply, if you're not registered to vote for a political party and you miss that registration date, your vote's not going to count, right? Or that's at least how independent voters view it. So then when they go, or when the election process comes around, they're very much less influenced to participate because they already feel like their participation is just excluded, right? So when it comes to independent candidates, if you're relying on independent voters to come out and support you, and they're already being told, well, you missed this date, or you're not registered for the proper party, or this laundry list of other things that has gone against you, you're kind of fighting an uphill battle in a game where the dealer already controls what cards you're going to get, right? So pair that with gerrymandering, and it's just a perfect storm of you have no chance, but thank you for trying.
I guess I would kind of push back on the notion that it's purely the voter registration deadlines are purely trying to disenfranchise people. I mean, there's also a logistics component in this too. And I've watched county officials who manage these elections who are busy doing a lot of different things, and trying to add people onto the voter rolls as you get closer to the election does seem to be a challenge. And I'm aware that other states do it, but I do wonder if this is purely just intended to disenfranchise people, particularly when I'm not sure that we've seen a huge increase in registrations. This would be a number I'd love to look into more. I'm not sure that we've seen a huge increase in registrations leading up to the deadline that exists now. The majority of my impression is the majority of people who are sending in voter registration updates and stuff are actually people who are going to the BMV and just updating their license, and they update their registration at the same time. And that's the majority of the registrations that they're processing leading up into an election.
One of the ingredients in that issue in LaPorte County is the fact that we do not have electronic poll books.
Absolutely.
There is an effort right now by our Board of Elections and Registration to move us toward electronic poll books. And that would enable us to do even same-day voter registration, which is being done in, I think, about 13 other states right now.
in the current system that we have, I don't think it would be possible to do without having electronic poll books. I don't think it would be possible to have same day registration. How would you make sure that someone didn't register here and then register somewhere else? And not to mention the staff on election day is extremely busy.
Mhm.
Here's another question for the panel to banter around it. Is it legal for redistricting lines in Indiana to be drawn strictly for keeping the current party in power?
Dr. Szarleta, is that something you might like to respond to?
Well, I guess the short answer would be no. You can't draw lines simply to keep a party in power. The longer answer is that I think, as the graphic illustrated, there's many ways to draw it so that it doesn't necessarily explicitly reflect an intention to do that. Okay, so yeah, I guess that's the best answer I can give at this point in time to explain how that process would work. But I think the graphic that we saw does a beautiful job of showing how that can happen. And then what has to happen is you have to demonstrate that those intentions are specifically there. And that's this whole process of challenging gerrymandering in the legal context, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'd like to chime in on this as well. I agree with what Dr. Ellen has said. For me, I look at it like this. Well, concerning other things that we have in our Constitution. So in short, no, it wouldn't be legal. But I look at it I correlate it to something such as in the Constitution, it is illegal for the state or the government to mandate, for example, a state church, right? Like a one church that everyone has to go to. So in my mind, I kind of correlate it the same way. We have two different parties, right? And it would be illegal for us to say, here, let's draw these lines for just one specific party to govern and lead, because, well, now you've cut out everyone else and their interest and what they view as important and their different dealings. They don't have a voice. They have no representation. And you have one party just doubling down on what they view as important, and it just cuts out everyone else. There's no diversity, there's no true perfect representation, and there's just no room for growth and improvement, because there will always be pushback from that other side. It's like, wait, well, we want a voice too. We have a voice too. It's like, no, we're in power. So that's kind of how I view it.
Mm-hmm. Great. Further discussion now among panel members about the issues that we've raised here during this session and how we should proceed from here.
I actually have a question to everybody, but specifically I wanted to comment on Nathan's observations with respect to education. I think probably almost everybody knows that Indiana has participated in creating an Indiana Civic Health Index since 2011.
Yes.
And those results have shown us a few things. And so I'm going to just share those with you and encourage you to go out and take a look at the Indiana Civic Health Index, because it does speak to not gerrymandering specifically, but it speaks to Nathan's point and, well, everyone's point with respect to the difficulties that individuals face in participating in the democratic process. And so getting back to Nathan's point, one of the findings was that education, and certainly civic education, increases political participation. And so I'm just really curious, since you're part of the younger generation, future leaders, how would you see, or could you comment on what might be a potential reform in our school system, since I believe you're also trying to become a teacher, is that correct? How would you see that evolving in our school systems? What would you like to share with the students so that they could better understand this connection between their right to vote their responsibility to register and participate, and then the outcomes that come from that process.
So a couple of things. I think Erin's the one that's going to become that teacher, but it goes well though, because it would be Erin's responsibility as far as a history teacher to give it to them straight, with the crookeds and the straights. And he would pass up on a huge opportunity if he weren't giving it to them, you know, how it should be delivered, as far as this is our history. Now let's dive into it. There's politics a part of this history. This is what happened here, and here's why. This is why we are no longer, you know, this is why we left, and here's why we're here. It's all politics. So it'd be his responsibility as a teacher to do it right, but it's not ultimately his responsibility, because it all starts at home. It all starts at home before these students get on the bus. It all starts with the parents teaching their children what you know, basically what's right and what's not right, and teaching them basic civility classes on, you know, basically the basics, back to the basics. Please, thank you, no, you know, ma'am, no sir, you know, yes sir, no sir, or how do we take away from the majority of your parents nowadays? They get mad at the students, or not the students, they get mad at the teacher, and they say, you know, I'm sending my kids to class, teach them. Well, you have to do something at home. You have to teach them at home. They're going to school to learn more, true, but ultimately that education starts at home. So I wanted to comment on that. But how I feel as though we can kind of come back and look into the future and build with the future here is by simply including the people that we have. People in closed door meetings, in commissions, in these boards, like I said earlier, they're the ones that are making decisions about what's happening in our schools, without including the people that they affect most, the teachers and the students. I had a friend of mine come to me just a year ago, last year, before I left for boot camp for military. And he said to me, he said, Nathan, he graduated from Michigan City High School, and he's now at Ball State to become a doctor. He wants to become a doctor. He's at Ball State there. And he says to me, he says, Nathan, I don't feel prepared for the real world. Okay. Now this is a young person who, you know, has a good family. They do well for themselves. And he says, I don't feel prepared for the real world. So in my mind, if you have this type of class of person, you know, good family, does well for themselves, what does that mean for the child or the person or the young person that doesn't have the support system that he has, as far as financially and what his family, you know, what his family is able to provide for him? I can only imagine what they're going through. He said, I don't know how to balance a checkbook. You know, he's like, I just really, from talking to you, that's how I kind of get my, you know, view of what's going on as far as my local government and what happens. Outside of that, I didn't know. And so what we did is we band together, him and I, and we came up with the solution to the problem. What we did is we went to the school superintendent and we said, so basically this superintendent, you know, he had, these people, they had something precious. You have students coming to you that went through your system. This young man, he went through the system, and I have my brothers went through the system, and I have a lot of friends that went through this system. And you have young people that are coming to you, and they're telling you, this is what we need, this is what we don't have, and this is what we lack, and we don't feel prepared for the real world. And we had a plan for him and her, and we had a plan for these people, and they said, well, we thank you, but we already have this thing covered, you know. So when you have young people, they're coming to you and they're saying, listen, this is what we need, this is what we're not getting, and for you to say, well, we already have this taken care of, thank you though, and they just go along with this system and just kind of rubber stamping the same old product with no revitalization.
Well, I agree with Nathan's opinion that that parents should ultimately be teaching their kids about civics. I do think that this is actually something that serves the government's own interests in educating people about how government works. Not too long ago, I was talking with a school superintendent who had recently gone through teacher contract negotiations, and he was expressing his frustration to me that the public didn't fully understand some of the limitations that were placed on him, be it by local government or state or national restrictions, and was frustrated about this. And I looked at him and I said, it's too bad there wasn't some sort of institution where you could force kids to learn about government so that you wouldn't have to deal with this problem. And he looks back at me and says, yeah, if only. It's like, we could be teaching more about government in school right now, but we don't. I distinctly remember, I'm not that far removed from high school, and the impression that I got for how the legislative process works was, it goes to the House, the Senate, signed by the government, piece of cake, easy peasy, done. And I'm sure Representative Boyd can tell us it's not that simple. There's a lot more committees involved. There's a lot of rules, how things move through there. There's so many different ways that a bill can be killed, and government class in school does not reflect those things. And I think Leigh can attest to the fact that we tried to actually have a conversation with school leadership maybe 3 or 4 years ago and encourage them to add more local government curriculum to their government classes, because this is something that is sorely lacking. When we talked with local students, I remember distinctly we asked one of them, what do you think your local town government does? And his response was, well, I know they clean the ditches. And I'm thinking, that's it? Like, what about all the other things? And so these are just some examples of where I think there's a compelling government interest in making sure people are educated about how government works. I think it's important.
Great, thank you, Justin.
I'd like to speak on that too, Justin, just briefly here. It kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier. It's the people that we vote to represent us, for them to stand out and to outshine the rest. You have to be effective. You have to be effective. And so if I'm going to be an effective public servant, because I can't stand the word politician, we're public service people. We are employees to you, the voters. And a lot of people, they get that mixed up. We're the employees. You're the employers. So it behooves me as an employee in any company to bring a good product to my employer. So if my employer wants a presentation on X, Y, or Z, it's my job as an employee. So in this case, a representative or a council person or a commissioner, it's my job to do everything in my power to present a good product. So how can I do that? Well, as a representative or as a senator, as a council person, I have a lot of different things at my disposal. I have connections. So what I can do is, like these town hall meetings, like I was saying, it's one thing to do town hall meetings is just stay at one spot and have them come to you. And it's another for you to go to them, go to the school systems, have assemblies, say, and come up with something solid, come up with talking points, come up with things that you want to present to your constituents and tell them, who are you? Why are you there? How you got there, and why it's important that what you do affects them immediately, as far as being a part of our local government. Why does this affect you?
Good points, Nathan. Good points. Are there any other questions now from our issues that panel members would like to discuss before we open the microphones to any further questions from participants? On Amy, do you have any other questions that have come in?
I just like.
Oh, go ahead, Pat.
Yes, Pat, go. Go, Pat.
I just wanted to say that one of the things people don't understand is that there's a difference between the federal government and the state government. I get letters all the time asking me to fix federal problems because they say, you got to fix Congress, you got to do this, you got we can't do that, but they're not educated enough to know this. And I think they do need to have more civics education.
Well, that is one of the #1 priorities of the Better Government Study Group that's been underway in LaPorte County since 2013, is to encourage youth engagement in the process. And Dr. Szarleta mentioned the Indiana Civic Health Index, and it's such an important undertaking, I think, and it really shows that we're missing civic engagement in so many ways in Indiana. And that's one of the reasons why things like gerrymandering go unobserved, because we're simply not connected. And that's been compounded, I think, by changes in our communication systems. Newspapers were once a much more viable source of information and stimulation for civic engagement. And as the newspapers have diminished in that role, there hasn't really been a strong replacement. Social media has some role to play in that regard, but there's a difference there. And so we've got to find ways, I think, of building stronger civic engagement. We are going to continue to try to work with school systems in LaPorte County to stimulate opportunities for student engagement in local government and learning about local government. And hopefully that will contribute a bit to that process. Any last words from members of the panel before we open the microphones for any further questions? I don't see any hands waving. Amy, anything further from participants?
A couple things. For Dr. Szarleta, you mentioned party neutral committees. Can you explain exactly what that is?
Sure. So different states have different ways of formulating those commissions, and there are many different variations. I think Pat actually referred to some proposals that were coming out of Indiana, if I'm not mistaken, Pat. But sometimes they are. It can be balanced bipartisan, so it could be half and half. It could be completely nonpartisan, in which case you give it to a separate agency like Legislative Services Agency in Iowa. Other commissions include Democrats, Republicans, and those who are nonpartisan. I guess some people might say that's independent. And so it really varies. And depending on the state's perspective on that, they'll create those institutions to reflect what they think is a unbiased perspective that could be brought to the table for thinking about these redistricting issues.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Another question here is since Indiana doesn't have a ballot process or a referendum process for the public to say, hey, we want to vote on this as a whole, is court action really the only alternative here? For those of us that have been, plugged into redistricting conversations, in Indiana, it really feels like a lost cause to get fair redistricting to occur in the state of Indiana. So is court action the only opportunity we have to make things right, or are the courts just so stacked against us too that it would make a bit of difference? And I'll open that to Pat. Why don't you start with that, and then for other panel members to join in.
What do you think, Pat?
Okay, right now, I think we are kind of at a lost cause status. Part of the issue is that redistricting runs from in a lot of districts, and sometimes there's no opposition, so there's no really election. They don't hear another voice. They don't hear any other opinions, and that's a big part of the issue. So other candidates need to step up and try to make a dent in the issue, because I don't think we'll get anywhere if we don't. Because right now, the law is what it is, and there is no movement to change anything.
Okay. Other panel members, any response that you'd like to add to that?
I'll jump in here and say that I think Pat's point is very well taken, especially if we're thinking about the short run, whether it's 1 to 5 years. But if we're talking about long run, I want to go back to points made by Erin and Nathan and others and say that, education really is the key here. When people can understand and connect their role in government to the actions that government takes, then you'll find, I think, increased accountability. And they'll start asking questions like, why is it like this? And why can't it change? And so I think in the short run, we're in a very difficult position. And hopefully with education, we'll be more informed citizenry that can reclaim some of the power that was given to us originally by the Constitution.
Right.
I agree, and I agree with that wholeheartedly. And one thing I just wanted to add something else here is, if following this whole thing, we are just now dealing with these problems as of what I would say about 50 years now, about 50, 60 years. So up until now to now, up until then to now, where was the slip or the flip? Where was the flip to bring us to where we are today, where there is, if you will, like someone said earlier, an apathy toward this process and these processes. There's a flip, and it's in that 50-60 year gap. What happened? What happened? Who was in power, or who was in power? Who was a part of aiding in the people in power? And how are we? Where are we? How did we end up to where we are today? And that's a whole entirely different other story. But I would say, there was things such as ideas put out as of 50, 60 years ago that, well, man, if I just, I'm working, I'm sick of this whole working thing. I'm getting tired of it. So if I could just do this or say this, then I could get this in return. And if I could and all I have to do is just sacrifice my vote. And these people say that they'll take care of these things for me. I like it. And all I have to do is tell my family about it. They like it too, because work is hard. We don't want to really do much work for what we want. These people say they'll give it to us just like that. All right, sounds like a plan. Let's roll with it. Well, we've been rolling with it for now 50, 60 years, and here we are today. We have voter turnout low. We have care about this process low, and now we want to slow the ball, and now we want to turn it around. And we have time to do that. We do have time to do that, but we have to actually do it. We have to actually do it. There's that saying, put your money where your mouth is, or it's actually time to do it. So.
Good, Nathan. The only thing I'd differ with you on, I'm wondering whether there really was a flip. I'm old enough to remember Ben Franklin. I didn't know him personally, you understand, but when they asked him what they'd accomplished at the Continental Congress, he said, "We've given you a republic if you can figure out how to keep it." And this is really where we are, and we've been there all through the years. The gerrymandering is not new. It's been a gradual, slippery slope process that has evolved over the 200 some years that our nation has been in existence. So, but we have an opportunity now, I really think, to change that direction. And I'm one who doesn't feel negative about the outlook for this process. I've been down to the General Assembly on a number of occasions, lobbying in the best sense of the word for fair and equitable redistricting. And what I've heard from legislators who actually even support the fair and equitable redistricting is, we don't hear enough from the people. We hear from you, we hear from Julia Vaughn from the Common Cause Indiana, we hear from the League of Women Voters, 1 or 2 people. But until there's a groundswell from voters that want to see change, That's probably not going to happen in Indiana. And that's why I'm enthused about the fact that Common Cause Indiana and the League of Women Voters of Indiana have joined with some 25 other not-for-profit organizations to form a coalition for fair and equitable redistricting in Indiana. This is stronger than anything we've ever had. And they've appointed an independent Citizens Redistricting Commission made up of 9 representatives from the state. 3 of us are Republicans, 3 are Democrats, and 3 have never had an affiliation with either party. And we represent all 9 of the congressional districts. And it's under the overall umbrella of All In for Democracy. And they are doing a number of things. Number 1, we've got public hearings. There are 2 more of them. We've held 7. There are 2 more coming. One of them is March 23rd at 6 p.m. And the one for Congressional District 2 is on 6 p.m. on March 30th. And all you need to do if you'd like to attend and participate in that public hearing is go to allinfordemocracy.org. It's on your screen right now. The public testimony that we are receiving at each one of these hearings is going to be compiled and shared with every member of the Indiana General Assembly so that they will know this is not something that 2 or 3 people feel strongly about. It's something that's important to the people of Indiana, the constituents that support the General Assembly. The second one is there's redistricting mapware software that everybody in the state has the opportunity to use. You can go and try your hand at how would you like to see redistricting done so that it's fairer and more equitable and conforms to the any statutory or constitutional requirements. And the League of Women Voters LaPorte County has it on their website. So it's lwvlaporte.org. And you can go in and try your hand, and you'll see it's challenging to come up with those districts in a fairer and more equitable way, but it can be done. And we've got the software that enables all of us to have the opportunity to go after it. So lwvlaporte.org gives you access to that software for redistricting mapping. But the third thing, and it's so important, is contacting your state-led lawmakers. Ask them to support the Indiana Citizens Redistricting Commission and make redistricting transparent to all Hoosiers. And you can find your lawmakers on vote411.org. That mapping software the commission then is going to use, and taking the public testimony into account, we are going to advance to the General Assembly our recommendation for how the redistricting map should be drawn for congressional and state legislative purposes. And we are going to be as vigorous as we can be in pursuing support for these initiatives. I have one of my favorite Democrats and a fellow commission member, Dr. Tom Tehurst from Fort Wayne, is with us this morning. So appreciate Tom being, and I hope he shares my perspective. I think he does, that this process is open, it's transparent, it's bringing us important input, and we're building support for a much fairer and more equitable way to do redistricting. And one thing to keep in mind about redistricting, this is not something that will happen this year and we can change it next year if something's gone wrong. Once this redistricting map is drawn and approved, it's there rock solid for 10 years, barring a Supreme Court ruling to the contrary. So we ought to assume that we've got one shot at trying to make sure the next round of redistricting is done fairly and equitably, because we won't have a chance to change it for another 10 years. And Nathan, you're going to be around in that another 10 years to worry about it. I might not be, but I want it to be right for you and your generation. Well, you know, I hope that we've achieved at least some progress on the 4 goals that I outlined to you at the beginning of the session today. The proof of the pudding, though, is going to be whether you are willing to be engaged, whether you're going to be a part of helping to get this process done more fairly and more equitably, whether you're willing to be in touch with your legislators and let them know your concern about it. It's not the political party that may be in power when redistricting is done that's the most important thing. It's you as the voters of the state of Indiana that are the important ingredient. And we ask each of you to write, call, text, or talk in any way with your representatives and ask them to support redistricting reform in Indiana. This year, Common Cause and the League of Women Voters and the other 25 or so organizations that formed All In Democracy are really going to be working hard to make this an important process. And we so appreciate the efforts of the League of Women Voters to help spread the word about this process. The information that we get through these public hearings coming up is going to be an important ingredient in the process. So participate in those upcoming hearings if you're available and willing. We know that you hopefully will take advantage of the opportunity to look at that software for mapping. We even have a contest for coming up with the best redistricting maps for Indiana. We've gotten some donors who are willing to make some money available, and we'll be looking for awarding a cash prize to the best maps that come out of land. Well, once again, much appreciation to members of the panel. I know this is a virtual meeting, but I really have a desire to make a big round of applause for our wonderful panel who's been with us today. And we thank them very much for being with us. I want to thank each of our participants for taking time out of their schedules on this beautiful sunny morning to be with us to learn more about the redistricting process. Amy Black, who's the secretary of our League of Women Voters, LaPorte County, has been with us today. And Bonnie Schaaf, who is the co-president, was your host for today's meeting. So a round of applause for them too. A lot of hard work in putting this together. Yay. So with that, I think we're there. May the session today, in some small way at least, contribute to a fairer and more equitable outcome to Indiana's redistricting process. And with that, I hope you're all going to have a great, safe, healthy, and a wonderful weekend coming up. All the very best. Stay engaged. Hey, thank you.
Thank you, everybody.